The man who lit the fuse of European warfare was an inquisitive English friar who began to investigate the magical properties of gunpowder.
When the flame of powder toucheth the soul of man, it burneth exceeding deep.
In the secrecy of his cell, Roger Bacon experimented with basic recipes brought back by medieval travellers from the East. Making gunpowder burn was easy, making it explode more difficult. It was his alchemist's knowledge of the properties of saltpeter that enabled him to start making the mixture more explosive.
If you throw saltpeter on the fire, it's very obvious that something special happens. It causes the fire to burn very fiercely locally, generate sparks, and the greater the extent to which saltpeter is purified, the more violent this reaction. Saltpeter is very often the white stuff that you can scrape very fine crystals from the walls of cellars. It's also the stuff that can that oozes out of piles of soil and earth contaminated with vegetable rubbish. Saltpeter can be really filthy brown stuff, and by the process of recrystallization, and chemists owe a lot to him for having developed the process of crystallization and recrystallization from a solvent, water, he was able to produce a white, very consistent solid, which in mixture with the others gave a consistent powder.
Many of the things Roger Bacon tried in 1242, Sidney Alford repeated as a schoolboy in 1942. Saltpeter is potassium nitrate, an oxidizing agent which provides extra oxygen for fast combustion. By increasing the ratio of saltpeter to charcoal and confining the powder in a paper tube, Bacon made his first bang. Roger Bacon was a scholar who laid the foundations for modern science. He always wrote up his experiments, but his black powder investigations frightened him. He foresaw the dangers if this formulation fell into the wrong hands, and decided to encode the recipe in an anagram in the Latin text. The passage ends with the words, "And so thou wilt call up thunder and destruction if thou know the art." Nothing so dangerous could remain secret. He knew that the more the powder was confined, the bigger the explosion.
Gunpowder has two very different ways of burning according to the degree of confinement. Now, this gunpowder is essentially similar to that known to the ancients, except that the proportion of the components is better adjusted in this case. It's better made, and it will burn correspondingly fast.
On ignition, this oxygen-rich mixture unleashes a rapid expansion of hot gases. If trapped inside a container, they will cause an explosion.
Now we should take exactly the same quantity of gunpowder, but this time confined in a cardboard tube. The effect will be rather different, and I think it would be a good idea to do this outside. This enhanced confinement will increase the speed of burning, so quite a high pressure can develop and should give more oomph, to use a technical expression. Firing! 4, 3, 2, 1.
Enough oomph to blast the helmet 50 feet into the air, and enough oomph to change the course of European history.
Think of what is shown by the fact that in 1449 the King of France did a tour of Normandy and, using his siege train, knocked down castles held by the English at the rate of 5 a month. It was the death knell of the old feudal system based on the stone castle, the mounted knight and so on, and the whole social system that went with that. And what it meant was that the people who could dispose of the power to produce gunpowder weapons were the ones who could control society.
Today, the targets are not castles, but corporate headquarters. The enemy, not soldiers, but innocent victims. And the knights need no armor, they are invisible. They came to the World Trade Center in New York and the Baltic Exchange in London. Not far from where they tested the atom bomb, they are testing a more insidious device, the terrorist truck bomb, with 40 bags of fertilizer and fuel oil. Instead of potassium nitrate, ammonium nitrate. Instead of charcoal, fuel oil. Slowed down 200 times, it's possible to see the supersonic shock wave ripple across the sand and pass across the New Mexico skyline. This initial shock wave is what shatters everything. When the shock wave hits the camera mirror, it tilts up into the sky. The air blast which follows as the hot gases expand spreads debris for half a mile. Finally, half a second after ignition, a rock shatters the mirror. Roger Bacon had felt the terror of gunpowder. The advent of high explosives would unleash an even mightier force. High explosives explode in a different and more dangerous way. Some are so unstable they must be approached on tiptoe.
I'd like to demonstrate an explosive that I haven't made and demonstrated for over 20 years now. Familiar to most schoolboys, it's called nitrogen triiodide. Now this is an explosive composed of nitrogen and iodine in a very unhappy relationship. You might describe it as being a very unhappy marriage. These elements are just waiting for an excuse to suddenly burst apart. It's so sensitive that even a fly landing on it might set it off. So if you kindly put on your ear protection and your eye protection, I'll now demonstrate.
Nitrogen triiodide is so wild, it would be hard for anyone to harness its explosive power. The first practical high explosives were discovered by accident when 19th century chemists began adding nitric acid to organic compounds to make new medicines. In 1846, the Italian scientist Ascanio Sobrero tried adding glycerine to nitric and sulfuric acid. By nitrating the glycerine, he had created a new oxygen-rich compound called nitroglycerin. This was a dangerous liquid whose rapid chemical breakdown could be triggered by heat or shock. Many chemists have been mauled by this beast. Bob Torrey has had a few close shaves himself. It held an irresistible fascination.
The power of nitroglycerine far surpassed other explosive materials. Yes, I suppose it did have a certain attraction, but being a liquid material, it wasn't very easily handled and it wasn't very safely handled.
Nitroglycerin has a mean reputation. One drop of its explosive power can be unleashed by a hammer blow.